is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tonight, the Prime Minister promised to shred the retained EU laws, but instead, could he just be risking support from the Red Wall? I'll be assessing the results of the local elections and how the failure to deliver on Brexit may have led to Labour's advance. The man who has rightly been called the Godfather, the Don Corleone of Euroscepticism, Sir Bill Cash, Sir William Cash, will be providing his invaluable expertise. What's happening with WhatsApp? What's up, WhatsApp? Well, it could be forced out of the UK. Now, after the Hancock revelations as a former minister, you might think I should be pleased about that. But it's the latest problem posed by the vast and controversial online safety bill. More on that shortly. And for this evening's epilogue, it's been a mighty weekend of royal grandeur and spectacle. We'll be looking at the future of the Commonwealth and global Britain with former Australian High Commissioner, the Honourable George Brandis. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by our punctilious panel, Mr. Toby Young of the Free Speech Union, who will be butting heads with our favourite socialist, Mr. Stephen Pound. But as ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of this programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But now it's time for Polly Middlehurst with the news.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening to you. Our top story on GB News tonight. 4 new official photographs have been released of their Majesties the King and Queen, as well as other members of the royal family. The portraits were taken on Coronation Day itself, with the King pictured in full regalia in the throne room at Buckingham Palace. And in the other photograph that's been released, Queen Camilla is pictured in the green drawing room and is wearing Queen Mary's crown and robe of estate. The King also released a coronation message thanking all those who were a part of the historic occasion and pledging to rededicate his life to service. Meanwhile, today, the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children joined millions of volunteers across the UK for the final day of Coronation celebrations. The King's grandchildren were helping the Scouts in Berkshire for the Big Help Out, as it was called. And after a day of painting and digging, they then toasted marshmallows and tried their hand at archery. And the Prime Minister, who was preparing food at a village hall in Hertfordshire, praised the weekend's celebrations.
And it's community spirit like this that binds our country together. It's fantastic to be a part of it here today and help out myself. Now, on the weekend, I think no other country in the world could put on such a dazzling spectacle. And it was a proud expression of our history, our culture, our traditions, but also a reflection of the modern character of our country. It was deeply moving to be in the coronation service and incredibly uplifting. And it's an experience, I think, that nobody will forget for the rest of their lives.
Well, in news away from home, Ukraine has accused Russia of firing drones at multiple cities, including over 30 at the capital, Kyiv. Officials also claim Russia plans to take control of the key city of Bakhmut by tomorrow, which is Russian Victory Day. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky will meet with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, tomorrow. They're going to be discussing a new EU support package. Meanwhile, the former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko says Russian aggression must end.
We have destroyed civilian object, and this is just very easy to understand. Putin does not stop shelling Ukraine, and the only way how we can stop Putin is our joint victory, like we do in the Second World War. Today there was anti-Hitler coalition. Today we create the anti-Putin coalition.
And lastly, the government says it plans to give £240 million to GP practices this year. It says to improve basic services. The money will be used, they say, to end the so-called 8 a.m. scramble to get an appointment and to introduce an online booking system. Receptionists will also have additional roles to speed up the booking process. That's your latest news. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's always useful to remember what people have said and not to forget the campaign promises that are given during the heat and enthusiasm of a leadership election. So here's a brief reminder of the Prime Minister's campaign video back in the summer of 2022. It was called Ready for Rishi. It was a pretty impressive video and pretty clear. That wonderful shredder going and 2,400 EU regulations being passed through it. Since then, we discovered there are actually 4,000 that could be passed through it, making the shredder work even harder and even faster. A really clear commitment backed up by the pictures to show what the intention of the Prime Minister was. But now we hear that a Cabinet committee is set to meet tomorrow to debate the watering down of the retained EU law bill. Now, I know that when I start saying retained EU law, everyone's eyes glaze over and they think it's time to put the kettle on. But this is about the laws that were made by the EU still governing us. Just think back to all those years when we're in the EU and it spewed out rules that we thought were ridiculous, that interfered with the nitty-gritty of our life, that made life more expensive and made the UK less competitive, that year in, year out made the fortress of the EU fail in comparison with growth economies. This is so important at the moment because When you're dealing with an inflationary problem, there are certain things that you have to do that are difficult. That's the Bank of England, it's tightening monetary policy, it's putting up the cost of mortgages. That has to be done to get inflation under control. But there are other things that can be done that are actually helpful. And these are improving the conditions for business, the so-called supply-side reforms, the deregulation, the making it easier for all of us to go about our daily lives, to buy goods, to buy services, to sell goods and to sell services, to be involved in export and import, to get goods in from other countries that may be cheaper, may in fact be better made than those required by EU product standards, which tend to be easily out of date and stifling. And if you don't believe me, just talk to Sir James Dyson, who knows a thing or two about making products that work and are popular. But we need to look at those laws that make us inefficient as an economy. Did you know that the Working Time Directive includes time when you may actually be asleep? Now, how can you be working when you're asleep unless you're Joseph and you interpret dreams? It simply makes the UK less competitive, or as uncompetitive as the EU is. We left. We voted to leave 7 years ago. The Prime Minister promised that he would deal with these laws, that he would give us these reforms. And now a committee is saying that that may not happen. It may not go that far. But does this have an electoral consequence? If you look at the local elections, Sky News has done a survey that showed some of the biggest swings from Conservative to Labour were in wards that had backed Brexit. And there's also the intriguing issue of leadership. We know that Conservative cabinet ministers occasionally think about who might be next. And you do wonder whether it occurs to them that being a staunch Brexiteer, actually delivering on what people want, may help them in the future. Not in the near future, of course, because we have a leader and we want to keep him. But eventually there will be a leadership campaign, and then people will no doubt refer back to how they behaved over this issue. As always, we want to hear from you. Let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. But I'm now joined by the doyen, the godfather, as I said earlier, the Don Corleone of Euroscepticism, Sir William Cash.
Good evening, Jacob.
Good evening. Now, this issue of retained EU law,
yes,
the getting rid of those rules that make our economy less efficient, you had a promise from the Prime Minister that he would deal with this.
Well, that's certainly quite clearly what I understood the case to be, and I'm just hoping that we stick to it when this Cabinet Committee has done its discussions, which I think is tomorrow, so I hear. So it really is important. I just add a slight gloss to what you said, because I think it's very important for people to hear, to understand, and sometimes it's not made sufficiently clearly, that these laws that were made over the 50-year period we were in the European Union were made by qualified majority voting of the other countries and behind closed doors without even so much as a transcript. Can you imagine the House of Commons not having Hansard, for example? This is the way these laws are made. So they lacked democratic legitimacy. And now we've got out, it's absolutely essential that we deal with those laws appropriately and we get rid of them, or we modify them in a way that will make them genuinely United Kingdom laws.
But these laws that were passed secretly, potentially by qualified majority vote, we've now operated with them for years. Why does it matter now, or is it essentially old hat?
No, it's very important right now that we get rid of them for this good reason, that actually you can't have two statute books. You can't have one lot of laws which are governed by principles of EU law, which were embedded in the legislation when we went in under the European Communities Act, where we voluntarily and wrongly abdicated our sovereignty, and then subsequently those laws, when they were made, were enforced by the European Court of Justice. And it's absolutely essential that we weed out the manner in which those laws were made, because they were made with different interpretations. The judges came to different conclusions. You can't have that lot, and then also the laws that are made after we left the European Union. In other words, you'd have two statute books, and that would be very uncertain and very confusing for people.
Because one of the criticisms made of repealing all this law is that it will lead to uncertainty for business. Aren't businesses happier with the rule book remaining as it is, not having change, just sticking to it?
Well, for the reasons that you gave earlier, the trouble is that when these laws were being made in this Council of Ministers behind closed doors, etc., actually they were also being made in a way that was by collusion and by consensus. And there never was a level playing field. I mean, I've been on the European Scrutiny Committee, believe it or not, since 1985. And that's a long time. I've seen an awful lot of these things. I've been on many, many of these laws and had to give opinions on the legal and political judgment on it. But basically, the reality is that we've now got to get rid of them because they are actually not in British interest. Some we can live with, I agree with that, but the majority of them have to go, and there are about 4,000 of them.
But you saw the clip that we showed, and you had the personal commitment from the Prime Minister that he would get rid of them. Why should that have changed now? Has the government found something that makes it particularly difficult?
I have no idea at the moment, because I'm not in the position to be able to say. I mean, we'll hear about what amendments are being proposed in the House of Lords. And also bear in mind, this bill went through on the very day that he became Prime Minister, as it happens, that afternoon. And I think you stepped aside on that very day, as it happened, but there we are.
You're absolutely right. I did business questions as a minister,
you did.
Bayes questions as a minister, and then I spoke from the back benches.
But it then went on to second reading that very day, and with all the promises of the manifesto, and our manifesto is full of repealing laws, deregulating and all the rest of it.
But do you have some sympathy for the Prime Minister that there's a busy schedule of legislation to get through the House of Lords? The House of Lords hates this bill because it's stuffed to the gunnels with Europhiles. It's going to take a lot of time in the Lords, and there are other bills that need to be got through. And therefore, if you give in to the Lords, if you let them water it down, it'll make the rest of the ambitious programme that the Prime Minister has easier to get through.
Now, you know I won't buy into that one at all. The bottom line is that the second reading of that bill on that very day when he became Prime Minister went through with a very large majority, and it remained unamended through the whole of the proceedings in the House of Commons. It then went to the House of Lords, and actually at this moment in time, the bill is itself unamended in the House of Lords. So everything is ready to go. Everything is ready to get the bill through as quickly as possible. And the next question is, what are they going to come up with by way of amendments, if that's what they do? And remember, the House of Lords, of course, is an unelected body. So it would be the House of Lords telling the House of Commons that they got it wrong. And I find that really deeply worrying.
And though after a coronation weekend we see the virtues of having unelected parts of our constitution.
Yes.
Ultimately, power must rest with the democratic arm.
Absolutely, and that is the most fundamental of our constitutional principles. And the constitutional monarchy can be demonstrated by royal assent of an Act of Parliament. When Her Majesty, the late Majesty the Queen, and I saw the coronation back in 1953, when she made her signature on one of those Acts of Parliament, it was royal assent by somebody on behalf of the United Kingdom. During the time that we were actually in the European Union, it became something else because we were rubber stamping the laws that they had made. And then now, the King, when he puts the words royal assent to an Act of Parliament, that will be his sovereign act as the King of the United Kingdom. That's what I want to see, and I don't want it to get caught up into a quagmire of some being pre-Brexit and therefore being governed by European principles. I want them to be decided by the voters of this country through their members of Parliament. That's the way our Constitution functions.
Restoring our freedoms. Well, thank you so much, Sir William. Remember, as always, I want to hear your thoughts, particularly on this knotty issue. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up next, good news possibly for Mr. Matthew Hancock, who you may remember, but perhaps bad news for the rest of us. WhatsApp could be disappearing from the UK. Find out why shortly. And don't forget the former Australian High Commissioner is here to romp through the joys of sharing our monarch. We may touch on the Ashes later this year, but crucially to discuss the future of the Commonwealth.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Leslie says, JRM, it is appalling and a huge break in trust by this government that they are not following the wish of the voters to repeal all EU laws. The government will fall if it fails to do this. Mike, I've always voted Tory and supported them. However, I cannot vote for them again after the net zero stupidity, immigration out of control and Brexit not done effectively. And I cannot vote for even more nonsense from the opposition parties. Please give us a sensible alternative of government who will look after the hard-working taxpayers, please. And Kathy says, Rishi Sunak was not elected, he will not be elected. I know you don't want to hear this, no I don't, but it is the vox populi that without Boris Johnson, well, I like hearing nice things about Boris, but I'm backing Rishi, the Conservatives have a snowball's chance in hell of obtaining and retaining a lead over Labour. Thank you for those. Please keep them coming in. The global messaging service, WhatsApp, could soon come to blows with the government over end-to-end encryption. WhatsApp has said that the bill, the online safety bill, provides no explicit protection for encryption, and this could potentially risk users' privacy. The fear of the state forcing private companies and private citizens to divulge private messages is real. This all comes from the bill which grants Ofcom powers to intervene in social networks. But surely this potential clash demonstrates the flaws in the government's proclivity to regulate everything with little foresight of the unintended consequences. Well, I've got my brilliant panel here with me now. Toby Young, who is in favour of free speech, and our socialist friend, Mr Stephen Pound, who possibly may also be in favour of free speech. But, Stephen, let me start with you.
Yeah.
Well, this bill is particularly interesting. They used to say about the Schleswig-Holstein question that there were only 3 people who understood it, and one was dead, one was mad, and the other didn't talk to us.
And it's actually true that one of them is Palmerston, one of them is a Prime Minister of Denmark who goes off to New Zealand, having gone round the twist, and the third was Bismarck?
It had to be Bismarck because he wasn't in communication. But the point about this bill is very few people understand it. And those who don't know much about it think that this is actually an anti-crime bill. It was actually protecting online items of abuse, child pornography, stuff like that, and also catching criminals. And this is the problem. There's a balancing act here between complete and utter Wild West freedom on the internet and some sort of regulation. And we haven't solved it.
I broadly agree with that, Toby. I find this really difficult because I'm all in favour of freedom of speech, but I want to protect my children. And one of my children was bringing the mail Moggs in this evening, being helpful as we're here. I don't want him to see horrid things or get ghastly messages on any messaging service. How do we square this circle?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't monitor people's telephone calls on the pretext that they might say something that might endanger a child. I mean, that's a rationale for having the equivalent of Big Brother from 1984,
But the security services can get a warrant signed by the Home Secretary to listen into your telephone calls. Isn't it the same? As long as there's protection by warrant.
Well, I think it's the problem here is that 98% of WhatsApp's customers are outside the UK, and one of the reasons they like WhatsApp is because it does guarantee this encrypted end-to-end service. So if they jeopardise that trust by reading people's messages in the UK, and the government hasn't proposed that they'd need a warrant in order to do that, then that could jeopardise their customers overseas. But, Jacob, I think this relates to what you were saying earlier. It's another Brexit betrayal. We were promised regulatory divergence. We were promised less red tape than in the rest of the EU to make Britain a business-friendly environment where entrepreneurs would want to set up businesses. But because we're now going to be even more regulated, I mean, the Online Safety Bill is considerably more regulation than is contained in the Digital Services Act in the EU. That means businesses will be leaving our country and setting up in the rest of the EU.
And hasn't Toby got a really good point? I actually have a friend who lives in a totalitarian regime who asks to contact me on WhatsApp because it's secure, it's the end-to-end encryption. And if we undermine that, totalitarian regimes will do it too.
It depends to a certain extent what you want to talk about. But the United States Navy created a thing a few years ago called Tor, which is the onion ring, which is like layers and layers and layers. You probably know all about that. And criminals thought that they could use this. And one of the biggest breakthroughs in crime busting and breaking up the gangs in Europe in the last few years has been the fact that governments have been able to actually tap into this. Now, I think the reality is to try to actually put your finger in the dike of the IT flood is it's a fallacy. You can't stop it. Therefore, we can try to regulate it, but we're going to come against this brick wall.
Well, we've got more IT to discuss because what's even more exciting, potentially, coming from the world of technology is the latest developments in artificial intelligence. The energy supplier Octopus Energy has been using artificial intelligence for customer services purposes. Incidentally, I used the train line and called them and spoke to a real person earlier today, and she was fantastic and helpful and fabulous. So sometimes real people are brilliant.
How do you know she was
nicer. She sounded real. She sounded absolutely splendid.
That's
anyway, they've done this with resounding success. Emails written by AI delivered 80% customer satisfaction compared to 65% when the emails were written by people. The CEO of Octopus Energy, Greg Jackson, stated in The Times today that this illustrated the terrifying pace of the technology and the potential for it to cause huge and rapid dislocation to the job market. Will AI be responsible for mass unemployment? Or are we being Luddites scared of technological advancement? And Toby, this is the Luddites, isn't it? They smashed up the farm machinery because they thought it would put them out of jobs, not realising that whenever you introduce new technology, it creates new and better paid jobs. You just don't know what they're going to be, but you know the jobs that are going to be destroyed. Isn't that the uncertainty and the difficult political issue?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult, and it may lead to people with not particularly marketable skills in low-service jobs having to seek employment elsewhere. But from a user, from a customer point of view, I mean, I think it's fantastic. I mean, one of the reasons there's so much customer dissatisfaction when they call up hoping to speak to human beings in customer services departments is they're put on hold, they're closed at weekends, they only work between the hours of 9 and 6. If it's all being done by an AI, there's no waiting time, they operate 24/7. And I'm sure that's the reason there's more customer satisfaction from the users of Octopus Energy.
I mean, I don't want to bang on all day about Trainline, but I rang them this afternoon because I'd made a mistake. And I spoke to a real person who I got through to almost immediately, who sorted out my problem in about 2 minutes. So real people can do things if the companies spend the time and effort to employ the right people and have the right approach to customer service. It doesn't all need to be done by
But you may have got lucky in that you got through to someone who was particularly good and you got through quite quickly. For the most part, the people you end up speaking to aren't usually terribly well trained. It often takes a very long time to reach them. I mean, in the case of when my son, for instance, is trying to book a driving test at the moment. My daughter's trying to get a new passport. Because so many public servants in these departments are working from home, it's almost impossible to get through. The waiting times can be up to hours. If that was taken over by an AI, I, for one, would be pleased.
They're at home, whether they're working, as I think...
I find
Stephen, you're more concerned about this, I think.
I find it absolutely terrifying. And I think there's a real confusion in most people's minds between the robot culture and the idea of artificial intelligence. I mean, 1871, Oscar Wilde wrote a book called The Soul of Man Under Socialism. And he said, humans should be spared the drudgery of working for others. 1920, Karel Capek wrote this book, Are You Are Rossum's Universal Robots, in which he said, you won't have to worry about doing those ghastly jobs. Robots will take it over. That was a marvellous idea. Suddenly, we got the thing today where we discovered that 2 computers have learnt Punjabi to talk to each other, and nobody knows why they've done that. We've now got an awful...
Well, they've taught themselves.
They've taught themselves, and they're communicating in Punjabi. And Greg, you talked about earlier on from Octopus, he said it could be that human beings are going to be like the ants we tread on without even knowing it, because ultimately this is like... Do you remember the robot in 2000 AD, Space Odyssey, where the robot says, no, you're wrong, I'm right. This is the computer that runs the ship. I find it terrifying, and I think we've got to build in some sort of controls, some sort of way to actually stop these people, because in fact,
Can't we just pull the plug out?
Well, they will create alternative energy sources.
I'm suspicious, Jacob, of these alarmist messages like the one we've just heard from Stephen. To me, it sounds like a familiar tune we often hear from people who want to grow the state, who want to increase regulation, who want us to have less freedom, because if they don't, there are all these risks that may prove existential.
Haven't we had this with GM foods? Every time there's new technology, it's the standard playbook.
I think this is a completely different league. You talked about Captain Swing and the Luddites and all that business. With GM foods, we all knew that was nonsense, all this Frankenstein food. I've been growing...
yeah, but the EU banned GM foods and still do.
No. We had F1 hybrid tomatoes. I've been growing on my allotment for 25 years. I'm happy to bring some in if you want. This is a completely different thing. This is artificial intelligence, which is artificial and it's intelligent, and it has the ability, in some cases, to override the human emotions, and that scares me.
Well, we must just hope that artificial intelligence doesn't replace the 3 of us and have an entirely different conversation. But thank you to my panel.
To the vote.
They'll still be here after the intermission, so don't go anywhere. Coming up next, in a mighty twist of fate, could the Labour Party be becoming the party of home ownership? And don't forget, the unleashing of global Britain is well underway, and we'll be joined by one of our most important allies, former representatives. All that after these messages from our sponsors.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know, Kate Moss? Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Bob from York says, Jacob, and thank you for this, I've always admired your straight talking. Why have you never put your name forward for PM? Well, I think I'd put my name forward. Others would have quickly pushed it backward. But never mind. Sharon says, Sir Bill Cash is a massive hero of mine. You're quite right, Sharon. Bill has done more for Euroscepticism than almost anybody else in the country. I do want him to know what a fantastic asset he is to the Tory party, like your good self, and all the respect he deserves. I hang on his every word, if only the majority of the party had so much passion for Great Britain. Thank you for those. In a bid to become the party of home ownership, is the Labour Party finding the Tories bathing and stolen their clothes? Well, the party has proposed a series of interesting policies to appeal to aspiring homeowners. It would see restrictions on foreign buyers and stop them from owning more than 50% of new developments to give Britain's first-time buyers first dibs on new properties. Though this policy boasts attractive furnishings, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has already warned that the reason the government won't raise these property taxes for foreign investors is because it risks freezing the housing market. So is this just another disposable policy for Keir Starmer, or is the Labour Party trying to get a head start on the Conservatives for the next election? Well, Stephen, I'll come to you again on this because this is really interesting. The Labour Party hated the sale of council houses. In the 1980s, it was not the party of home ownership. Is it now becoming the party of home ownership? It wants to build more, it wants to get back to having targets for development, and now it wants to help first-time buyers.
Hang on a second. I mean, we were against the idea of selling council houses and not allowing the capital receipts to be used to build new houses. And that was infuriating. The idea was originally, if you remember, Mrs Thatcher was saying it's going to be one for one. You know, you buy one, you sell.
Yeah, but you oppose council house sales. So are you now...
Yeah. No, can I just get one thing? This idea that you can somehow limit the sale of properties in the United Kingdom to purely people who are maybe indigenous Brits or whatever is nonsense. We built some houses behind Ealing Town Hall, and we had an open day, and there's a Chinese family came there, and they were buying one of the... I said, well, you know, what are you buying it for? And they said, it's for our son when he's at university. And I said, well, how old's your son? They said, well, he's not born yet. And I said, yeah, how on earth can you possibly stop it? Because if you say you can't buy a flat if you're Chinese, they'll just do it through an agent, But look, Lisa Nandy's got some very, very interesting ideas about this, and particularly she's talking about fiscal mechanisms, about helping people with mortgages. Supply and demand is just one aspect of why capitalism actually is so successful, although it breaks my heart to say so. Because if we can actually increase the demand by reducing the initial costs to people, to first-time buyers, then the supply will follow.
Toby, I mean, it does seem to me this is quite attractive. I don't believe in limiting sales to foreigners, but promoting first-time buyers, when you've got a Conservative Party that is refusing to build anything and is hammering the private rental market, the Labour Party is putting itself on the side of home ownership. That seems quite a popular thing to do.
Well, I think the problem with saying to people living overseas, you can't buy property in this country, is that will mean fewer large residential developments being built. A lot of them depend upon foreign investment. If you tell those investors they'll only be sold to UK residents, at least for a fixed period, there's going to be less investment. I mean, I think part of the part of the theory behind this is that if you reduce demand, you're going to, by restricting the ways in which foreigners can buy property here, you'll reduce price and make stuff more affordable for first-time buyers. But if you reduce supply at the same time, you're not necessarily going to bring prices down.
And actually, it's all about increasing supply, isn't it? Which this government should be doing and the Labour Party should be talking about. How do we build more houses when we've had an increase in the population, partly because of immigration, also because of household sizes shrinking, and we just haven't built enough
But don't
houses.
forget, there's land banking is going on. Huge swathes of our green and pleasant land are land banked.
It isn't, Stephen. The property companies have 4 to 5 years of land bank, which, considering how long it takes to get planning, is low. That land banking is one of the myths
It's
of
renewable,
people.
by the way. It is renewable. It isn't 5 years and then you're out. You can actually... But surely the answer to this has to be supporting the first-time buyer. I think that in some ways housing is going to be one of the great issues at the next general election, because at the moment, I mean, my daughter's 34. She's a teacher. She earns a very, very good salary, and she is absolutely... She's living in the attic at the moment, to be perfectly honest, in our loft extension. And it shouldn't be that way. And certainly in the last few weeks going around the country on the elections, people have just been saying the housing market is broken. Now, I think that this overseas buyers is one aspect. I don't think that's the one.
That won't happen.
No. But it's got to be about supporting... Today, in some of the papers, they're talking about zero deposit mortgages. Now, we don't want to get into a situation as we had in 2008, but that we have to do something to make life easier.
Zero deposit mortgages assume that property prices go on rising forever and that therefore people have some equity pretty quickly. Whereas if you're building more houses, actually prices stabilise or fall, which makes zero 100% mortgages quite risky.
100% mortgages are extremely risky and were one of the reasons we had the global credit crunch in 2007-08. And I think one of the problems with this policy, as Stephen says, it's hard to see how the Labour Party would make it work. And it's an odd thing for the Labour Party to be getting behind, saying we're going to discriminate against people from overseas. If you're not a UK passport holder, you won't have the same property rights as a UK passport holder. That may even be challengeable in the European Court of Human Rights.
Which they're so committed to. But isn't this a bit like Gordon Brown standing up and saying he wanted British jobs for British workers? That bit of it isn't really going to happen. The key bit is the backing for, and the moral backing for first-time buyers from a party that historically actually wanted the state to be managing housing.
Yeah, well, you can see maybe it does represent a slight change, a shift in Labour Party thinking, part of Keir's programme to appeal more widely to try and win back some of those defectors to the Conservative Party. You can see why the Labour Party would want to present itself as the party of home ownership, particularly as it's becoming a tricky issue for the Tories.
Traditionally, I remember Herbert Morrison saying that, he was going to build the Conservatives out of London when he built the St Helier estate and all this. But if you look at Vienna, where they've had a policy now for nearly 40 years of state-supported low-cost housing, not rent controls, because rent controls don't work, we found out in Berlin, but actually have decent housing. People don't necessarily want to live, like I do, in a semi-detached suburban house with a garden. Some people are quite happy to live in flats. And in Vienna, it actually works. Do you know there's no housing waiting list in Vienna?
But opinion polls show that 70% of people in this country want to live in a house with a small garden.
Well, fair enough.
And that's what we should provide, which we're not providing. Yeah. And we've ignored the immigration factor, haven't we? First of all, we undercounted the people coming from the EU, and then we pretended that this wasn't having a big effect on housing numbers, whereas actually it's been really important. On top of the failure to build enough anyway, have another couple of million people. That's more housing that you need that we just haven't provided.
It's been a factor, but equally so has the under-occupation. I mean, John Prescott was not always known for his cerebral analysis of the situation, but he referred to the number of houses where you can now have a single person living in them. We cannot make it attractive enough for people to actually move out of 3- and 4-bedroom houses. So houses are there.
You are showing you're in a socialist in that comment, because if people want to under-occupy their house, it's their house. I don't care. It's none of my business.
Yeah.
But the socialist wants to tell them you're not allowed to under-occupy house. Come on, Toby.
Ease them. I think isn't that the fundamental problem with saying we're going to restrict who can buy houses? You're interfering
we agree with that.
In people's rights.
So
I mean,
we agree on that.
If you have the money, it doesn't matter where you live. If you want to buy a property in London or elsewhere in the UK, you should be able to.
I mean, fine, I've got no problem.
Well, here we are. The panel, my brilliant panel, is on the side of the Chinese entrepreneur. You heard it here first from our socialist panellist, Stephen Pound. Up next with me to reflect on the spectacle of the weekend, as well as a look forward to the future of the Commonwealth, is the former Australian High Commissioner, George Brandis. There'll be a fascinating conversationalist. Don't go anywhere.
On Dan Wootton Tonight, former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng is live in the studio for his exclusive reaction to the Tories' election wipeout. Plus, after Prince Harry's humiliating appearance at the Coronation, is the troubled Duke now just a spare part? Join Dan, Nigel Farage and Angela Levin for unmissable political and royal analysis, 9 to 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. John, really nice message from John, thank you. Guys at GB News, you are truly Britain's news channel. Your coverage of the Coronation is a defining moment for you. We are so proud of you. You have made even me, a virgin Republican, not quite turned monarchist, but made me feel proud to be British again. You are fabulous, well done, and congratulations. Well, thank you. That's really nice of you, John. Alex, how long before we have AI doctors? And if any of these were to misdiagnose, how could we sue a machine? That's a very interesting question. It's a question that comes up with cars as well. If they're driven by a machine, who's responsible? Anyway, over the weekend, the UK watched one of the greatest displays ever of national identity. But it's easy to forget that this identity actually extends well beyond the United Kingdom. The King's accession to the throne marks not just the beginning of his reign over 65 million subjects of these islands, but also his other realms and his leadership of the Commonwealth, everywhere from India to Singapore, from Nigeria to Australia. And it could be that it is with these nations that the future of global Britain lies, not least because of our close cultural and historic ties, but also the opportunities they present for free trade and international cooperation. Just over a month ago, the UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement reached royal assent. It will remove tariffs on over 99% of the £4.5 billion of Australian goods exported to the UK every year. This trade deal, along with others in the works, CPTPP and AUKUS, that very important defence deal, are the building blocks of a very bright future for a post-Brexit Britain. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the representative who was instrumental in the Australian trade deal, the former Australian High Commissioner, the Honourable George Brandis. George, so nice to see you and call you George, because we've always been on your Excellency terms beforehand.
Very nice to see you again, too,
It's
Jacob.
brilliant, because you were so involved in getting this trade deal, which seems to me one of the best things we've done since Brexit.
During the time I was the High Commissioner, and when I was sent from Australia to London, my number one task was to land the free trade agreement. And it comes into force at the end of this month. It took quite a lot of doing, quite a lot of very skillful and tough negotiating on both sides. I think we should pay credit to Liz Truss in her then capacity as the International Trade Secretary, who really whipped Whitehall to get it done, if I may say so. And the Australian ministers, Simon Birmingham and Dan Tehan, who were equally instrumental in accomplishing this very comprehensive, as you say, Jacob, a very, very comprehensive free trade agreement. You know, most free trade most trade agreements that are called free trade agreements aren't really free trade agreements. They're concessional access agreements in which there is a reduction of tariffs or quotas across a variety of sectors, but it's not comprehensive. The Australia-UK free trade agreement is comprehensive. It is as pure a free trade agreement as you're likely to find.
99% of tariffs gone, and this will mean that all those obstacles to trade, and not just tariffs but also regulatory barriers, will be removed, that we will recognise Australian goods as being safe.
Correct. And as well as that, the much freer movement of people, particularly young people, between Australia and the United Kingdom. So previously, young people could live in our respective countries for up to a year unconditionally. That has now been expanded to 3 years, which will make a very, very big difference.
Will be very important and helps with our overall relationship, because on the Global Britain part, AUKUS is a deal that I think is really important for global safety, and how important Australia has been in understanding the risk from China and realising that before other countries had woken up to it.
Well, I think the AUKUS Defence Pact and the Free Trade Agreement are sort of two sides in a sense. Oh, there are differences, of course, because of the presence of the United States in one, not the other, but nevertheless, they are two sides of a comprehensive view of global Britain and the tilt to the Indo-Pacific, the commercial dimension and the strategic dimension, which buttress one another.
Yes, and the relationship between Australia and the United Kingdom, and yes, we've got the same monarch, but we've got a shared history, we've got the common law, we've got a democracy formed on the same basis, a Westminster parliamentary system. That creates a great deal of trust and reliance on each other when we have these agreements.
Well, indeed it does, and I'm glad you used the word trust, because about 18 months ago, one of the leading Australian international relations think tanks, an institute called the Lowy Institute, which publishes an annual public attitude survey, always asked the question as part of that survey, which country do you trust most in the world? And the last time, in fact the last several times that survey was published, the nation that Australia trusts, this is the Australian public, trusts most in the world is the United Kingdom.
And I think that's, I mean, I haven't seen a specific poll, but I think that's heartily reciprocated from the UK. And that what I think is so interesting about AUKUS and the Australians' leadership role in the relationship of the West to China is what we as medium-sized countries, I mean, you're huge geographically, but medium-sized in terms of population and economy, can do together. That we're not trying to be superpowers, but because we have a democratic base, because we have widespread relations, we can offer leadership to the Western world that other countries can't do. But in cooperation, it's even stronger.
I agree with that. And one thing that reinforces that is the long-standing links and the trusting relationships that exist, particularly, I might say, between the military and the intelligence agencies and so on, who are so acculturated to each other's way of doing things. Australians train here, British people train with the Australian military, and the personal bonds at that level are never to be underestimated. But the personal bonds generally between Australia and the United Kingdom are the mainstay of the relationship, I think.
And can between the two of us we do more throughout the Commonwealth? Because that seems to be such a resource that, in a way, neither of us are maximising to its greatest potential.
Well, I think that's true. As the High Commissioner, I was a member of the governing body of the Commonwealth, and in fact, only last week I caught up with the Secretary-General, Baron of Scotland, who I got to know very well. I think that we all underappreciate the potential of the Commonwealth. And if I may say so as somebody who is not British, I think in particular the United Kingdom, and even more particularly still your Foreign Office, underappreciate the value of the Commonwealth. It's almost as if some of them are kind of embarrassed that they think it's a hangover of colonialism. Well, I've got to get over that, because the Commonwealth is an extremely it is a force for good in the world, and in such a contested world in which free societies and open societies are being challenged by authoritarian belligerents like China and Russia, there's never been a more important time for nations which, however diverse they may be, culturally and historically, nevertheless share an aspirational link to Westminster to cooperate.
And that's the issue back to trust, that they're a group of countries that can basically trust each other because they have identifiably similar constitutions that value freedom and democracy and indeed the rule of law.
And they're all nations, particularly the 15 nations of the realm, which have a real sense of emotional connection to the United Kingdom through the Crown.
But come the very end of June, you and I may well be at Lord's Cricket Ground, and at that point we can have a thoroughly rude but deeply rooted in friendship argument. Is that fair?
Well, that's absolutely fair. And I think that the forthcoming Ashes test, the Ashes are so emblematic of everything between us, because we're competitive, we're mutually respectful, we're feisty, but it's such a bond between people.
And very often I find I admire Australian cricketers more than any others. Glenn McGrath is one of my great heroes. His metronomic bowling I thought was a joy to watch. But I'm afraid I'm overrunning. So thank you very much, George, for joining me. That's all from me tonight. The great Dan Wootton is next. Dan, what have you got in store tonight?
Jacob, what a great weekend it has been. So we're wrapping up the two big stories. Why did the BBC and ITV allow the woke mind virus to go through their coronation coverage? Plus, Kwasi Kwarteng on how the Conservative Party can win the next election after the disaster of the locals.
Oh, well, that'll be absolutely brilliant to hear something positive about the Tories' future. We're going to have the weather in a moment. It's sunny in Somerset. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. It's Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation Tonight.
Hello there, welcome to your GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. I'm Craig Snell. As we go through the next few days, really it's a mixture of sunshine and scattered showers. Some of these showers will be quite heavy and thundery. It's all down to this area low pressure. It's not really going to go far over the next few days, keeping us with rather changeable conditions, but in any sunshine it should feel fairly pleasant if you are out and about. So as we end Bank Holiday Monday, still got some thunderstorms across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Could just see a little bit of disruption here. Otherwise, this band of heavy rain will spread across many southern and eastern parts of England. But then later on in the night, really, most of us turn a little bit drier, but rather cloudy and damp. And temperatures for most actually staying in double figures. So a bit of a grey start on Tuesday. Still some overnight rain to contend with in the east. Sunshine will develop, but that in turn will allow some showers to quickly form, and these showers will turn heavy and thundery in places, especially come the afternoon. Also quite slow moving across parts of England and Wales, so could see large amounts of surface spray on the road, so do take care if you are out and about. In the sunshine, though, it will feel fairly pleasant, highs reaching 20 or 21 degrees in the south. The showers will rumble on as we go into the evening, but for most it should turn drier and clearer as we head towards midnight. But it won't last in the west. Another band of rain and showers will spread in here. But over towards the east, with the clearer skies, a cooler night than the night to come. But out towards the west, another mild one, with temperatures here staying firmly in double figures. So after some sunshine in the east as we start Wednesday, really it goes downhill from the west as this next band of rain and showers spread its way in. And overall, really, Wednesday's another day of bright spells and scattered showers. And again, some of them showers could potentially be quite heavy and thundery. Very little changes as we go into Thursday, another day of sunshine and showers, but hopefully something a little bit drier coming through as we go into Friday.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence. That